Hello everyone. The term highly sensitive person was coined in 1996 by Elaine Aron in her book, The Highly Sensitive Person. She claims that HSPs, or highly sensitive people, lived life in technicolor because of their increased sensory processing sensitivity, aka a more finely tuned nervous system. She summarizes our core traits with the acronym DOES, DOES. The D stands for depth of processing. We feel very deeply and we tend to overthink and overanalyze a lot of things in our daily lives. The O is for overstimulation. Let me give you an example of this. So I love parties, but I almost always have to retreat to a corner after an hour or so with a book, or maybe just go home after I've socialized thoroughly for a short amount of time. I just can't take the smell of room freshener, sweat, pizza, deodorant, all that stuff after a certain amount of time. It just makes me sick. In fact, you know, even the music kind of gets to me. Even if it's a rock song that I really enjoy, after a point of time, those heavy chords, when they resonate around the room, really make my head hurt. The E is for empathy. We show this in many ways, the most common being mirroring other people's emotions or just absorbing them. Either way, it's very evident that other people's emotions affect us to a large extent. And the S is for subtleties. We pick up on the finer details of social situations just like a finely tuned sensor. So, as you can see, being an HSP is about far more than emotional reactivity. So I'd like to start by telling you what people think I am when I tell them that I'm a highly sensitive person. They say, "Oh, so you cry a lot?" or "Stay strong, you'll get through this." Sometimes they even say, "But I've never seen you cry." Many assume that I'm shy or scared or introverted or weak, like I'm some little naive puppy who won't make it through life unscathed. Well, that's partly true. I do cry very often, sometimes more than thrice a day. I am an introvert, albeit quite a social one. And sometimes I get so scared of harmless looking people that I cannot bring myself to argue with them or I will cry. But I'm not depressed, bipolar, weak, or unstable. I'm just experiencing life through heightened emotions, heightened senses, a sensitive nervous system, and a very vivid inner world. Every emotional experience is very rich and deep, and I get overwhelmed and overstimulated very easily, not only by stressful work environments, but also by things like temperature changes, overpowering tastes and smells, crowds, and loud music. Sometimes I cannot physically contain my annoyance at something as silly as the fan being on a higher speed than I'm used to. Traditionally, society frowns on sensitive people. I mean, we've been called all sorts of things in our lives: crybabies, snowflakes, angry feminists, or maybe that's just particular to me. But we've been told that in order to succeed, we have to be strong, or not take things too hard, or just grow a thick skin. I have been told that pressure in academic environments will always exist so that the weak people get weeded out. Think of it as natural selection, my ninth grade teacher told me. Now, this terrified me beyond belief because I associated my sensitivity and related peccadillos with weakness. And that made me believe that there was no place in the world for a person like me because I got overwhelmed so easily. I believed that to be highly sensitive was to be highly flawed. And it was because of that belief that I developed a dangerously low self esteem coupled with depression and anxiety. But what people don't realize is that nearly 70% of the introverted population is made up of HSPs. On that note, it's time to bust some myths. If you assume that all HSPs are quiet wallflowers, you're wrong. In fact, 30% of all HSPs are extroverts. And because of the fact that women are associated with sensitivity, crying, and introversion, many assume that most, if not all, HSPs are women. In fact, you couldn't be more wrong. 50% of HSPs are men. Now, while this surprised me when I heard of it, it makes so much sense that we don't hear of HSP men very often. In our society, sensitive men are slandered for being effeminate or being pushovers, and they are bullied for it because we see sensitivity as the opposite of masculinity. I'd like us all to question why the idea of a sensitive but strong man is so alien to us all. And of course, the most common one is that all HSPs are weak. In fact, HSPs have strengths apart from empathy that are becoming increasingly important as we progress as a society. But before I tell you what those are, please note that you might see these traits in some HSPs, all HSPs, or none of the HSPs that you know. Similarly, you might not see any of these traits in people you think are HSPs. Despite that, I think that all of these traits are present in everyone to some extent, but many people who identify as HSPs might have them in a larger amount. The first one is that we are self-aware. This is very important to us because we as HSPs are so easily overwhelmed that we have to know exactly what our tastes are, our preferences are, strengths and weaknesses, things that trigger us, in order to make sure that we live in an environment which is as relaxed and comfortable as possible and not triggering to whatever extent we can manage. The second one, I actually haven't observed in myself. I've observed it in my dad, who is an HSP himself. And it is that they are excellent mediators. This has a lot to do with the fact that HSPs absolutely abhor conflict, and they do their best to peacefully resolve situations in order to reach a win-win outcome. The third one is that we value integrity. We are guided by our values and principles, so we have a very strong sense of what is right and wrong. We believe in ideas of fairness and morality, and we feel very overwhelmed when anything violent, aggressive, or demeaning happens to someone around us. We are thus seekers of justice. And the fourth one, in my opinion, is the most beautiful, and that is that we live life to the fullest. We live in the present moment, and we're very cautious not to overwhelm ourselves, so we take good care of our psyches. We choose to do things that allow for a richer, more fulfilling emotional experience, and we take things at our own pace, thereby enjoying everything that life has to offer. And the fifth one is that we are creative. Because of the fact that we live in such a rich inner world, or such a vivid inner world, we love to share that with others through mediums like art, film, music, poetry, or literature. So, in closing, I would like to say that HSPs aren't better or worse than other people. We're simply different. The aim of today's talk was not to force upon you some sympathy for HSPs. I just hope that I've spread some amount of awareness about our so called mysterious group